Before I begin, I would like to make a small confession to the group here. I've been involved in one way or another with this subject for over 30 years. But about 6 months ago, maybe 8 months ago, I was about ready to pack it all in, walk away from the subject, just say to hell with it and not ever get involved with it again. And the reason for that was that having been involved with a number of different organizations over the years and done a lot of research both in the military and outside of the military, I had reached a point where I was just up to here with all of the fighting, the rock throwing, the name calling, the brickbats, the mudslinging that goes on in UFO research. And many of you who have been involved in that know exactly what I'm talking about. We apparently have been our own worst enemies over the years. Not only do we have to deal with all of the lies and the cheating from our government, but we haven't made it easier for ourselves with all this name calling going on for a long time. And I got so fed up with it. Excuse me. I also got a little fed up with the fact that all of the years that I had been trying to discuss this subject seriously with a lot of people, I was not enthused, I was not impressed at all with the response from the American public. And I got a little bitter about it, and I got a little cynical about it, and I got to the point thinking to myself, damn it, if they don't really care, if they're not really interested, why the hell should I worry about it so much? Why should I work so hard and strive so desperately to bring some of this information out? Well, fortunately, my attitude changed, partly because I was successful in a lawsuit that I was involved with. For those of you who may not know anything about me, I retired from the military in '76. I immediately began to work for Tucson and Pima County as an emergency services plans and operations officer, and for the last 8 years worked for the Pima County Sheriff's Department in that same capacity. And in 1990, my boss retired from his job. I and 70 other applicants applied for the position. We went through the entire hiring process according to all of the statutes, all of the rules. And I ended up number 2 on the list, and a good friend of mine came out number 1. Well, Karen, number 1, turned the job down, and they should have offered the job to me. Fully qualified, fully trained, all of the certification necessary. Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA certification, graduation of all kinds of schools and courses, and they didn't let me have the job. Didn't offer me the job. Never gave me any excuse and reasons as to why. It came to be that we found out when I brought about legal action against the sheriff that his main issue with me, his main reason for denying me the position of emergency services manager was that I was interested and involved with UFO research. And the state investigators, the city investigators, the county investigators, civil rights people, all of them looked at that and said, what the hell does that have to do with this? Here's probably one of the most qualified people we've got. You're denying him the position because he's been involved and interested in UFO research. Well, it all came to push come to shove. I ended up filing a grievance, and I filed a charge. And then I finally got myself an attorney, and we went to court. And it took 2 long years. And I've equated it with the Korean War and the Vietnamese War because the toll upon me and Cecilia was very much like a war. We had to take out a second mortgage on our house. We had to borrow money to hire a good attorney to sue the Pima County Sheriff, who was the chief law enforcement officer in Tucson and Pima County, for violating the law. Well, just to summarize quickly, I don't want to go into that. It's all over with now. It took 2 years. It took over $31,000 of our money to bring this guy under the legal system in Tucson and Pima County to the courts. 1 week before a jury trial, the sheriff decided to settle out of court. After 2 full years of pure hell, we won the case. We got the job, we got the back pay, we got the retirement, and we also got a relatively comfortable amount of money. Well, we got $100,000, which was tort damage money, which I must tell you is tax-free. So the 2 years of pure hell we went through, and having mortgaged our house, we did come out of it all right. We survived it. And the fact that I became somewhat of a celebrity here in this issue, because I think I'm the only one that I know of who has successfully sued anybody on the issue of UFOs. And a number of people all over the country, in MUFON, CUFOS, and friends of mine all over the United States, were following this whole thing very closely. And the fact that we did get a couple of articles in several of the tabloids, we had a little 12-minute stint on hard copy. The interest of the case was pretty interesting all over the country. There are a lot of people following this. But I must tell you, and I'm pleased to share with you, that we did win the thing. We did prevail. We made an issue of it, and I'm delighted that we made some progress here, because hopefully in the few years ahead there will be some hesitancy on the part of certain other bureaucratic people to let an issue like this come as far as it did with me, that they denied me. Well, thank you. It was just a matter, it was a moral issue after it was all over with, the fact that they would dare do that. I had to sue the chief law enforcement officer of Pima County for violating the law. And then I had to stand back and watch him for 2 years use the county attorney to defend him for violating the law. And then they did that with taxpayers' money. And that really frosted me. Being an old infantryman, that really brought me to the bar. And I'm delighted to tell you that we did win, and I want to share that with you and then go on. Anyhow, about 6-8 months ago, I was ready to walk away from this thing because of that issue and a number of other ones. But I had just completed a 6-week tour in Europe. And I was speaker at 3 major international conferences. And I met literally hundreds and hundreds of people, researchers, bona fide, reliable, intelligent, serious UFO researchers. And they encouraged me. And just having been with them and met with them, I found strength and encouragement. And that, coupled with the fact that I'd done a little more research in my own personal investigations and found out how much our own government is involved with what is known as psychotronic research. I got so damn mad that, being angry about the fact that they've been lying to us for over 40 years about the UFOs, having found out what some of the things are going on in psychotronic research, I got so angry I said, to hell with it, I'm going to come back and fight this all the way through. I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to open my mouth. I'm going to blab and bring as much attention to this issue as I possibly can. So, thank you.
Bob Dean was in line for a promotion at his job that he says was shot down by an unidentified wrench in the works. Now he says he knows the problem, an unidentified flying object. Our Doug Bruckner has the story.
All his life, Bob Dean has been in the business of saving people's lives. First as a career soldier, and for the past 15 years or so, protecting his neighbors in Tucson, Arizona. Bob's one of the top workers in the city's emergency management service. He deals with natural and man-made disasters, mopping up hazardous waste spills, responding to tragedies, like the day there was a toxic blast down the tracks at the chemical plant there.
We're standing on the location of what turned out to be one of our worst chemical accidents here in Tucson. The plant employees were coming out with tears, coughing, gasping, wheezing, because a lot of them had been affected by this toxic gas, and most of them were evacuated and taken to the hospital.
Last year, all those years of service seemed ready to pay off in a big way. Bob was just a couple of years past 60 when he found himself in line for the promotion of a lifetime, a chance to be boss, to run the emergency management department.
They selected 3 finalists. A very good friend of mine who works up in Phoenix ended up #1 on the list. They offered her the position and she turned them down.
Bob was next up, and in the end, he was the only man for the job. He knew it, everybody else knew it. All he needed was for Sheriff Clarence Dupnick to make it official. But days passed, and Bob Dean never got the word he was waiting for, so he called the sheriff, and he was told a final decision had not been made.
And I said, I've been a team player, I've played by the rules, I expect at least to have the opportunity to show you that I can do the job.
Bob figured the reason was sex. He knew the first choice would have to be a woman, so Bob filed a grievance against the county. Still no job. Bob's lawyer came up with another theory, age discrimination. At 62, perhaps the sheriff thought Bob too old.
I thought, well, it's possibly that's my age. I was a little sensitive, and I thought, well, you know, I feel pretty professional. I'm probably at my peak intellectually. And I deserved at least a chance to show them I could do that job. So I filed an age discrimination charge.
But after months of questions and depositions, Bob found the truth about why he didn't get his promotion. And it had nothing to do with his sex or his age. No, it had something to do with all those years of public service, and something to do with that picture behind Bob on the wall there. That's a picture of a place called Finger Rock outside Tucson. A lot of people believe UFOs have landed there, and Bob is one of those believers. And in a deposition taken from Sheriff Clarence Dupnick, the sheriff revealed the real reason why Bob wasn't made boss.
The sheriff stated, and this, what I'm reading you, is as much of the quote as I can get. Here is a person, the sheriff referring to Mr. Dean, here is a person who, in my opinion, has an unusual belief. I am not saying a person can't believe whatever they want to believe, and there are a whole lot of well-thought-of people, scientists included, who happen to believe in UFOs. I don't happen to be one of those people, and in my judgment, I am not saying it detracts, but it's just something I wouldn't want our organization to be identified with for a variety of reasons.
It was shocking to me, surprising to me, but in that deposition, the sheriff, a man who I respect, admire, and have worked for a number of years, stated that the primary reason that he was not giving me the position was that I'm involved with UFOs, you know.
At the height of the Cold War, UFOs were regularly violating restricted airspace over Eastern Europe, posing a chronic threat of accidental nuclear war with Soviet Russia. NATO commanders in France commissioned a detailed secret study of the phenomenon, which Command Sergeant Major Robert O. Dean had classified access to. A study that confirmed planet Earth was in fact being regularly surveyed by multiple extraterrestrial groups. After honoring his secrecy oath for 30 years, Bob decided the tax-paying public had a right to know that their government possessed full knowledge of the extraterrestrial reality.
And I had access to material, documents, information. And I learned firsthand that this is a real phenomenon here.
And in 1964, he got hold of a top-secret study, a study about unidentified flying objects. Bob says there were photographs, documents of sightings, evidence that some strange visitors were causing blips on radar screens that the Cold Warriors thought was the enemy. The study, Bob remembers, concluded that the Earth was being visited regularly by aliens. Aliens with such advanced levels of technology as to make U.S. and Soviet defenses useless. Bob's career went on unaffected, but in his spare time, he continued learning as much as he could about UFOs. He became something of a local expert, but he never dreamed it would cost him a job. Sheriff Bill Dupnick didn't want to talk. Meanwhile, we went with Bob Dean to Finger Rock, the place in that picture in his living room. Bob Dean wasn't afraid to talk about what he's learned over the years.
I think that there's an unenlightened public out there that has a right to know. They have a right to understand that something has been going on. And it's so exciting, and it's so important, and frankly, in my own personal view, it's beautiful. The beauty of the idea that we are not alone.
Why is this?
I think the media has bought into the governmental bit about, oh, this is nonsense, this is ridiculous, this is not something serious. The media, I think, has bought that from the government. And the media are responsible themselves. They have never taken a serious look at this issue. They've never looked at the evidence that exists. They've never come to the experts and said, look, what's this all about? What can you show us? What is really going on? There are stuff happening out there, Ted, as all of you know, day after day after day, and the media totally ignores it. But if you have something like the Moody trial here, oh boy, it's big news. Aliens told him to do this.
But what is the context? It's lurid.
Lurid.
It's tabloid.
Sensationalism.
It's sensationalism. And it doesn't lend any credibility to the issue of the UFOs.
And they loop the alien, the extraterrestrial matter in with all of this other nonsense. Do they ever look at something as serious as this particular textbook here?
What is it?
Tell
We
us a
did
little bit about this.
we did a show on that, but tell the viewing.
Well, the Fire Officer's Guide to Disaster Control, the second edition, is a very special book put out by two of the top firemen in the United States. This textbook is a textbook that's used at the National Fire Academy in Emmitsburg, Maryland, to teach firemen, fire officers, fire chiefs, emergency services managers, all about what's necessary in disaster control. This book came out 2 years ago, and there's an entire chapter. Well, I think you have the excerpt.
This is
there.
the extract from it.
There's an entire chapter devoted to the UFO issue.
No.
Yes.
Why would they? If the government says they don't exist, why
Well,
would they?
These fire experts, the two men who put this book together, and the reason this book is being used as a textbook at the National Fire Academy is that many of the professionals out there know that this is real.
Who gets that book?
Every one of the professionally trained firemen in the United States
In
who
the
go
United
through
States?
Emmitsburg, yes. They go through the academy at Emmitsburg. Now, Emmitsburg is not just the fire academy. It's the Emergency Services Emergency Management Institute. Now, I graduated from there some years back with a master's equivalent degree in emergency management. This book goes out to every professional firefighter in the United States. On page 458 in this book, the UFO threat, a fact. It goes on. UFO discussion, why now? UFO background, UFOs, what are they? UFO classification, shapes, history. Now, this is very thorough.
So it isn't one paragraph
No,
saying
no,
put out a flying saucer if it lands and it's on fire.
Why the secrecy? Why the secrecy? Well, I'll tell you why some of the secrecy. UFO missions, adverse potential. I advise every damn member of the media out there who snickers and laughs and ridicules this subject just to look at this particular chapter for a few minutes.
But you know, everything that we get from FOI and Freedom of Information Act and everything else, is there any blacked out things? Are there any blacked out lines in there?
Oh, 99% of the stuff you get is blacked out.
It's really interesting that the government policies that UFOs don't exist, but in case one crashes in your municipality, this is what you do about it.
And it also says that UFOs pose no threat. But yet here it is, in case it does crash, this is how to take care of it.
Robert Dean has a list of credentials a mile long. He served 4 years from 1963 to 1967 at Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers, Europe, the military arm of NATO. He was an intelligence analyst with a cosmic top-secret clearance.
Well, Don, it began for me in 1963 when I was assigned to the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers in Europe. I arrived in the summer of '63 and I was assigned to the Operations Division. I was further assigned to what we call SHOC, the War Room, the Supreme Headquarters Operations Center. And at that time I was given a cosmic top secret clearance, which was and still is the highest level of security access that NATO has. When I was assigned to the War Room, I learned that a study had been initiated in 1961, and everybody was talking about it. They were gossiping about it. And the subject was UFOs, and that intrigued me a bit. When that study was concluded in 1964 and it was published, and I was still working in the War Room at that time, I had access to this document. I had a chance to read it. And having been exposed to it, I must tell you honestly that my life has never ever quite been the same. Because I read first-hand reports verifiable NATO military material that indicated that the UFOs were not only real, that they represented something far beyond anything I had ever imagined before. When the study was concluded in '64, they concluded that there were 4 different groups apparently coming and visiting us. Out of those 4 different groups, one group looked exactly like we do, so much so that they could sit beside you in a restaurant or in an airplane or in a theater, and you'd never know. And that particular point bothered the military guys a lot. The point being that some of these people from somewhere could be walking up and down the corridors of SHAPE headquarters, or they could be walking up and down the corridors of the Pentagon. One day at lunch, a lieutenant colonel made the remark, he says, "Jesus, do you realize they could even be in the White House?" And there was a little forced laughter at that point, I remember, because a lot of us over the years have had some misgivings about the occupants of the White House. But the point I'm making is that the idea that aliens could be here in our midst bothered the military, because if you're not paranoid when you go into the service, you're certainly trained very quickly to be so. It's the nature of the military mind, I think, to be paranoid. But that was only part of the story. The SHAPE conclusions in '64 were that there were 4 groups that we knew of. They were apparently interplanetary. Some very likely were interstellar. They even concluded that some of them could be intergalactic. When I retired in 1976, many of our military people knew at that point that we were not simply dealing with visitations from people from other planets or star systems. They had concluded by '76 that some of these visitors very well might be multidimensional in their source. The evidence that we had collected and the evidence that they had repeatedly demonstrated to us, and that's no accident. It became very clear after a time that there was a program or a process of some kind underway, that they had demonstrated over and over and over again that they apparently were able to manipulate matter and time. Now this really shook up our scientists. There are a lot of new young scientists in particle physics today who talk about multiple dimensions. There's a brilliant young professor in New York by the name of Michio Kaku, who has written a brilliant book called Hyperspace, where they talk about 10 separate dimensions. I'm not enough of a physicist to try to explain to you what a dimension is, but the idea that there could be intelligences from somewhere else, from other dimensions, coming and going into our reality. It's been quite a shakeup in traditional science. I guess I speak out openly and bluntly about this because I feel so strongly about it. I violate my security oath every time I speak about it. I do it intentionally and I do it on purpose, because I feel so strongly that the American people not only have a right to know the truth, but they have a need to know the truth. The truth, Don, apparently is simply this, that we're not alone, we've never been alone. We are apparently part of an infinite universe filled with intelligent life. I find that exciting. It doesn't frighten me. The SHAPE study concluded in '64 that if they, whoever they were malevolent or hostile, that they could have taken this planet and cleaned it up and eliminated us, turned us into dog food or whatever, a long, long time ago. That the historical evidence indicates that they've been with us a long time, and I've concluded that we had what I like to call an intimate interrelationship with at least one of those groups, the group that looks exactly like we do. And that point is, I don't like the word alien. I don't think the term alien is appropriate at all here. I like to refer to them as family. We're related to them. I think they had a hand in our being here. And I think the time has come where we're about to meet our extended family. It's going to be very soon, and the people are not ready. And one of the reasons I do speak out so bluntly and so openly is if in some small way I can help people get prepared for this. Because I believe that this reality, once we have accepted it and understood it and gone beyond the fear, will bring about an expansion of consciousness in the human race that will truly help us and prepare us to go out there and take our rightful place in that infinite community of life. In 1963, I applied for and received one of those rare special assignments that sometimes you get in the military, where I was able to take my family with me off to Paris, France. My kids went to high school in Paris. I received what many of us in the military consider to be a plum assignment. I was assigned to the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers in Europe, which at that time was located in a little town just outside of Paris, France. I arrived there at SHAPE headquarters in the summer of 1963. I arrived with a top secret clearance, and I was immediately given an upgrade to a cosmic top secret clearance, which was and still is the highest level of security classification that NATO has. I was further assigned into a place we called SHOC, the Supreme Headquarters Operations Center. As such, I worked in the SHAPE War Room. Now, many of you, I'm sure, have seen photographs and pictures of what these war rooms look like. Most of you are probably familiar with what you've seen on films about NORAD, the big display, the big maps, the telephones, the teletypes, the computers, and all of that. Well, the state of the art in 1963 was not quite so advanced as it is today, but we did have a functional operating war room there in SHAPE headquarters in Paris in 1963. Now, it's also important that I share with you that SHAPE's theater of operation was the entire NATO theater of operation, all the way from northern Norway to the southern tip of Turkey. Every military activity going on inside of NATO's theater of operations was commanded and controlled from that SHAPE war room. When I arrived, I was a senior master sergeant at the time. I had just been promoted. I was put in charge of all of the younger men. I also, because of the work that I had done and some of the background that I had, after a time was given a job of being involved in intelligence analysis. Intelligence analysis is simply a way of bringing together bits and pieces of information and data. We had reports from intelligence operatives in the field in Poland, Czechoslovakia, East Germany. We had operatives at work in the field in the Soviet Union itself. We were getting input continually from all over the Warsaw Pact area. Trying to analyze an intelligence flow of information is basically like putting a jigsaw puzzle together, where you got all these little pieces with all these different colors, and you don't know where they belong. But once you begin to fit them together, weigh them, sift them, and analyze them, you find that after a time, they begin to make a picture. This literally is what intelligence analysts do. It's what I did. It's what I was brought into. I was trained in those days to become an intelligence analyst. It's the most exciting work I think I've ever done. When I arrived in the summer of 1963, I learned of a study that had been initiated by NATO headquarters in 1961. It intrigued me. Everybody working in SHOC would gossip about it. There were whispers, there was talk. But we didn't know very much about it. All we knew is that the subject, the study, involved UFOs. I vividly remember the first time I was ever exposed to the SHAPE study. I was working in the war room one morning. We were on 24-hour shifts in those days. I usually set these shifts up, and I was working in there one morning about 1 or 2 in the morning. I remember I was bored because the war room was quiet. Very little was going on. The teletype machines were quiet. The phones were not ringing. Most everybody was nodding off. We'd read all of the magazines and all of the old newspapers. The coffee was too black to drink. And I remember I must have attracted the colonel's attention, the controller who was on duty that morning. an American full colonel, United States Air Force, by the name of Frank Collins. Colonel Collins came over and he handed this document to me that he'd pulled out of the vault. And he said, read this, this'll wake you up. It not only woke me up, it changed my life. The study was initiated to determine whether there was a threat to Allied forces in Europe. It was a strictly military study directly focused on one thing. Is there or is there not a threat to our military forces in Europe? Now, for those of you who may remember those years, we in the Soviets and the Warsaw Pact area were looking at each other across a divided Europe in the 60s. On both sides, the NATO forces, the Allied forces, the Warsaw Pact forces across the border that divided Europe, we each and every one of us had our fingers on the triggers. We had our thumbs poised above those red buttons. World War III was only a few moments away. The study was initiated in '61 by Air Marshal Sir Thomas Pike. SHAPE initiated a special UFO study program. They called it an assessment. They also gave it a subtitle of an evaluation of a possible military threat to Allied forces in Europe. Now, this study was initiated primarily because of a number of incidents that had been happening over the years. And all through the late 50s and early 60s, large numbers of circular metallic objects were flying all over Central Europe. I must tell you that not only were they flying then, but they're still flying today. These objects were circular, they were metallic, they were flying at a very high altitude, in formation, obviously under intelligent control. They would generally fly out of the Soviet sector from the east, over Central Europe, over a divided Germany, over France, southern England, over the southern coast of England. These formations would generally turn north and disappear off of NATO radar over the Norwegian Sea. Now, for a number of years, the Soviets thought those objects belonged to us. And for a time, we thought they actually might belong to the Soviets. Once the study was initiated in '61, and once it was published in 1964, it became very apparent that neither the Soviets nor we had that kind of technology to put that kind of technology in the skies. So the big question was simply this: who are they? Why are they here? And where are they from? Now, their flying over Europe had a number of times almost had we and the Soviets shooting at each other. So in 1961, after a particular incident at 2 o'clock in the morning on the 2nd of February, 1961,
where roughly 50 of these objects flew over in formation at a high rate of speed, obviously under intelligent control, did the same damn thing. The Soviets went on red alert. They closed all of the borders in Berlin. We went on red alert. Everybody responded. When the teletypes were going off, the phones were all ringing. All hell was breaking loose all over Central Europe. We thought the war had begun.
After it became very clear that those objects didn't belong to us, and we knew that they didn't belong to the Soviets, both sides of our Iron Curtain were trying to come to terms with what was really happening here. Air Marshal Sir Thomas Pike, who at that time was the Deputy Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, he worked closely with and for my boss, General Lyman Lemnitzer, an American Army four-star general who was known as SACEUR, the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe. Air Marshal Pike initiated this study to determine just what in the hell is going on. Who are these guys? Where are they from? What do they want? We were to learn over the course of the next 2 years that the Soviets had a study of the same kind. They themselves were trying to determine what was happening there. Well, let me tell you, it took a full 3 years of focused military study to determine what this issue was all about. They published 15 copies only. Cosmic Top Secret, the highest level of security classification that NATO had and still has even today. Copy number 1 was given to the Secretary General of NATO. Copy number 2 went to my boss, General Lyman Lemnitzer, the Supreme Allied Commander. Copy number 3 was placed in the vault in shock in our war room. That was the copy that I had access to. That was the copy that I was able to pull out of the vault every chance I got. Now, what did that document essentially say that made such a difference to me, that impacted me so much? It not only affected me, but it affected every one of us at the headquarters who read it. It affected the air deputy, an American Air Force 4-star general by the name of Robert Lee. When General Lee read this, his aide told me that the old man sat at his desk, he unbuttoned his blouse, he threw his hat across the desk, and he says, "Do you know what this means? Have you any idea what this means? Nothing will ever be the same." He says, all of our missiles, all of our rockets, all of our thermonuclear weapons, everything we have is meaningless. Nothing will ever be the same after this. Now, the old man was so affected by it that literally he submitted his retirement papers within a year after this document was published. So it had an effect upon him, it had an effect upon General Lemnitzer, an effect upon Air Marshal Pike. Everyone who was involved in this study, who had read it and knew what it meant, who for a moment would grasp the implications and the ramifications of it, were affected by it. Now, when the document was published in the summer of 1964, there were a few basic conclusions, and I will share those with you. Remember, this was a purposeful military study, and they ended up with a military conclusion. The planet Earth, this is really what rocked my boat, changed my life. The planet Earth, and apparently the entire human race, is and has been the subject of an extensive, intensive, and massive survey and examination by several extraterrestrial civilizations. This survey has been extremely thorough and detailed. That's a zinger in itself. That'll get your attention. These civilizations have demonstrated not only high intelligence, but an extremely advanced technology that may be possibly hundreds, if not thousands of years beyond ours. Evidence collected and studied by this report indicates that apparently there is some kind of process or plan unfolding. They continually demonstrate that the development of some kind of program is underway. Evidence in this report leads to the conclusion that this survey has been going on for a very long time, possibly several thousands of years. Military intelligence analysis have concluded that there did not appear to be a major military threat involved. The conclusions seem to indicate that if they were either malevolent or hostile, that there was absolutely nothing that we could do at that time. And I must tell you that that same thing applies today. NATO and shape policy dictates that an ongoing study continue by the various military committees, and that as many resources as possible by the major powers be committed to this matter. This entire subject is considered to be of the highest importance and extremely sensitive. This committee recommends that the highest level of classification be placed upon this matter, if approved by SACURE, to be at least cosmic or above cosmic top secret. At the end of the Second World War, and coincidentally as the first half of the 20th century was drawing to a close, a new and frightening reality was confronting the planet Earth. The political leadership of most of the major nations of the world were confronted by unmistakable evidence that the human race and the planet Earth were being observed, studied, and surveyed by an advanced, high technology, extraterrestrial civilization. The impact of this reality upon the world's leadership was literally stunning. After the horrors of the Second World War and the newly emerging paranoia of the Cold War, a decision was made by the leaders of the world to totally deny this shocking new reality to their people, and to secretly and unofficially continue to study and evaluate the new phenomena under the tightest lid of mutual national security. Decisions were made at the highest levels of world government that the mass of the human race were totally unprepared to deal with this new extraterrestrial matter. Secret studies had indicated that the mass of people were psychologically, sociologically, and theologically unready to confront such a shocking reality. It is now almost 50 years later, and the peoples of the world are still being kept in total darkness as to the ET reality. Why? A curtain of national security has been lowered and reinforced so tightly on the American people that many of their precious constitutional freedoms have been eroded to non-existence. National policy is being made in the United States on this matter by individuals who are not elected and are totally unresponsive to the constitutional system. Members of the Congress, senators, and even presidents are denied information. What is so important that the entire U.S. constitutional system is being sacrificed by the cover-up? Why is it so necessary to lie to the American people? I, for one, deeply believe in the American people's ability to accept, understand, and deal with the extraterrestrial reality. I believe that retaining and preserving the United States Constitution is more important than continuing the biggest secret and cover-up in history. I believe that our government, lying to the American people, is not only irrational and immoral, it is a deadly threat to all that we hold dear. When lying becomes so institutionalized in American government operations, the people are disenfranchised and tyranny reigns. We are running out of time. The truth must be told, and that truth will set us free. Please listen. The people themselves are ready for this. The people themselves are prepared. They're not shocked. They don't run panicking through the street. They don't become hysterical. If you present it to them in a thoughtful, intelligent, non-threatening way, give them the historical perspective, they deal with it. They can deal with it. They're not the boobs their government thinks they are. The American people are intelligent, they're thoughtful, and they're responsible. They simply deserve to be told the truth, and they have a need to be told the truth. And there essentially is why I'm doing what I'm doing. Gentlemen, we live in interesting times, don't we? I'm always amused when I'm reminded that was an old Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times.
Yeah.
We're sure living in them.
Yeah. They are interesting times, all right. You know, if you stop thinking, we've lived We have probably lived in the most exciting times that have occurred on this planet in the last few millenniums.
I'm going to live to be 100, so I'm going to get to see a lot more.
We'll get to see a lot more.
Good
Yeah.
for you.
Right.